They say pleasure is the reward. But what if it's the distraction? What if the chocolate, the scrolling, the lust, the laughter aren't moments of joy, but masks we wear to avoid something much older, much deeper, and far more uncomfortable? Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And in today's world, pleasure has become the most beautifully absurd form of escape. We live in an era where pleasure is everywhere, but peace is rare, where the pursuit of comfort has become louder than the pursuit of meaning. Let's begin here. When was the last time you felt full, without needing more? Not just satisfied, not just entertained, but deeply, completely, profoundly untouched by craving? If you can't remember, you're not alone. You're just alive in a world that taught you to confuse stimulation with nourishment, a world that whispers, more, 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 and convinces you that the ache in your chest can be solved with a screen, a bite, a hit, a swipe. But the truth, most of us aren't chasing pleasure. We're running from silence. Every time you open your phone just to scroll, not because you're curious, but because you're restless. Every time you eat when you're not hungry. Every time you want someone, not because you love them, but because you're lonely. You're not choosing joy. You're choosing anesthesia. Jung saw it clearly. He taught that within each of us lives a shadow, the parts we silence, suppress, and bury. And every unconscious pleasure is a shovel, because most pleasure isn't pleasure. It's relief from self-awareness. It's a way to turn down the volume on the ache without ever asking where the ache came from. But the problem is this: each time you numb, you deepen the hunger. And when the hunger grows, so does the illusion that something is wrong with you. But you're not broken. You're just unaware of how cleverly distraction disguises itself as joy, the pattern we mistake for love. Have you ever chased someone who didn't want you? Held on when everything in your body told you to let go? And still, you waited. You hoped. You called it love. But Jung would call it something else. He would call it a compulsion of the unconscious. You weren't loving them. You were reenacting a wound, replaying an unmet need, projecting your own forgotten pain onto someone who reminded your nervous system of a story you never got to finish. Here's what most people never understand about attraction. It's not about what's good for you. It's about what's familiar to you. The coldness that feels like home. The distance that feels like your father. The silence that mimics your mother's unpredictability. The hot and cold that mirrors your childhood confusion. That's not chemistry, that's memory. You were taught that love feels like butterflies. But often, what we call butterflies is actually anxiety, anticipation of abandonment, fear disguised as excitement. Carl Jung believed that the people who trigger us the most aren't punishments, they're invitations. He said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But transformation doesn't always feel safe. And when we're not ready to face ourselves, we cling to others instead, hoping they'll fix the ache we never learned to hold. This is why we chase people who can't love us. Not because we're stupid, not because we're weak, but because our psyche is desperate for completion, and it believes that if we can just get that one person to stay, we'll finally undo the original wound. But they never stay, because they're not meant to. They were never the solution. They were the mirror. And until you see the difference, you'll keep mistaking pain for passion, absence for depth, and self-abandonment for devotion. So pause. Look back at your past relationships and ask yourself honestly, was I truly in love? Or was I just trying to rewrite my childhood through someone else's body? This is not shame. This is clarity. Because once you name the pattern, you no longer have to repeat it. You get to choose peace over panic, wholeness over hunger. And you get to learn that real love doesn't feel like chasing. It feels like resting. And if this content is making sense to you, then click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. The myth of eternal pleasure. There is a myth we've swallowed without chewing. A myth that says happiness equals pleasure. That fulfillment is the same as stimulation, that if something feels good, it must be good. And so we chase the next notification, the next like, the next hit of sugar, sex, status, distraction. But here's the hidden wound in that chase. Pleasure is not designed to last. It flickers, it fades, it was never meant to hold you. And yet, we build our identities on it. We call a relationship successful if it feels good. We call a day productive if it was pleasant. We measure our lives in how much we consumed, rather than how much we truly felt. Carl Jung saw this with piercing clarity. He didn't say to reject joy. He said to question the version of it you were sold. Because when you think pleasure is the goal, you build a self that avoids discomfort at all costs. And here's the cost. You start mistaking discomfort for danger. You avoid every quiet moment. You flee from the very emotion that's trying to free you. Pain becomes the enemy. Stillness becomes suffocating. And the only thing that seems to soothe the ache is more stimulation. But this is the trap. Because stimulation doesn't heal. It hides. And when you keep hiding from your own life, the part of you that wants to live begins to dim. Not because you're broken, but because you're tired of chasing a high that never stays. So ask yourself this: when was the last time you felt joy that didn't need to be posted? Peace that didn't need a filter? Love that wasn't confused with craving? Most people never pause to ask that, because asking would mean facing the emptiness beneath the noise. But if you're still listening to this, you're not most people. You're someone ready to break the myth. Stillness is not the enemy. Here's the truth. No one profits from telling you. Stillness is not failure. It's not laziness. And it's not a sign that you've lost your way. It's the beginning of remembering who you were, before the world told you who to become. Jung believed that every psychological awakening starts with a breakdown of the persona, that carefully constructed version of yourself you created to survive. You weren't born needing to prove your worth. You learned it. You learned to rush so you wouldn't feel shame. You learned to smile so others wouldn't leave. You learned to perform so you wouldn't disappoint. But beneath all that learning was you, the real you, the quiet you, the you that's still here. And that version of you doesn't need constant movement to feel alive. It just needs presence. But presence requires something that modern life hates: slowness. Not slow productivity, not mindful multitasking, actual, deep, unapologetic stillness, the kind where your phone is off, your achievements don't matter, and your only goal is to listen, really listen, to the murmur beneath your thoughts. Because in that murmur, your soul is speaking. Jung would call this the stirrings of the self, the deeper self, beyond ego or identity, the part of you that cannot be marketed to, that doesn't crave applause, that doesn't want to be better. It just wants to be, but most people never hear it. Not because it's silent, but because they're too busy shouting over it with their goals, their guilt, and their grind. Stillness terrifies the modern mind, because it has no badge, no medal, no dopamine spike. It's just you, with you. And if you're not at peace with that, you'll keep trying to outsource your worth to everything outside of you: relationships, followers, possessions, titles. But those things are weather. You are the sky. And when the storm passes, and it will, only one question will remain. Did you ever truly come home to yourself? Why the universe sends the person you can't have? There's a reason that person appeared in your life. Not to complete you, not to hurt you, not to stay forever, but to crack you open. Carl Jung believed in synchronicity, the idea that certain people or events show up in your life not by coincidence, but by deep psychic necessity. So when someone enters your world and shakes the foundation of everything you thought you knew, that's not a glitch. It's the divine curriculum, and often the most powerful catalyst is the person you can't have. Maybe they were emotionally unavailable. Maybe they were already committed. Maybe timing tore you apart before you could ever begin. But still, you felt them. Like a tuning fork for a song you forgot you knew. They mirrored something raw in you, a part that had been buried, a need you never voiced. a wound you never honored. And that mirroring wasn't a promise of forever. It was an invitation to return to yourself. You see, we don't fall for people. We fall for the parts of ourselves we see reflected in them. That wildness, that safety, that passion, that peace. It wasn't them you were aching for. It was the version of you they awakened. And once you see that clearly, once you stop romanticizing the ghost and start listening to what it called forth, you realize the universe never sent them to stay. It sent them to show you your longing, your shadow, your desire for connection that doesn't require performance. So no, they weren't your twin flame. They were your trigger, your teacher, your mirror. And sometimes the greatest act of love is to thank the person who left, because their exit was the entrance to your wholeness. Jung would say, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So maybe this person wasn't fate. Maybe they were your awakening, not to them, but to you. And the deeper truth, if they hadn't walked away, you never would have returned. The final layer, stop chasing and start listening. There comes a point in your life where the chase becomes exhausting. The striving, the trying, the proving, the endless reaching for answers outside of yourself. It begins to crack you, and then something shifts. You stop running toward, you stop running away, and you finally sit still. In the silence you used to avoid, that's when the real voice comes through. Not the voice of the world, not the voice of your trauma, but the voice of you. Jung believed the soul whispers through symbols, through dreams, through patterns that repeat until you finally pay attention. That person you couldn't be with, that heartbreak that nearly broke you, that longing that never made sense, it was never about them. It was a message, a mirror, a metaphor. Because the universe doesn't send what you want, it sends what you need, what you're finally ready to see. And when you stop chasing people, you start noticing patterns. When you stop begging for clarity, you start receiving intuition. And when you stop needing someone to come save you, you realize the one you were waiting for was always you. That's the invitation, not to find the one, but to become the one. Not to chase fate, but to trust the unfolding. Not to obsess over who left, but to understand what their absence is asking you to reclaim. Because in the stillness, you realize the pain didn't happen to you, it happened for you. It was the friction required to awaken the flame. It was the detour that brought you back to the real path. It was the goodbye that whispered, "You're ready now." And once you understand that, you'll stop asking why them, and start asking, what did they reveal in me? And that shift, that's the alchemy. That's when the pain stops being a prison and becomes a portal. If this resonated, take a moment to subscribe, drop a comment below, not for the algorithm, but to mark this chapter in your journey. If you made it this far, you're not just watching, you're remembering, returning, reclaiming your inner ground. So trust that the video YouTube shows you next, the one appearing now, is not random. It's the next doorway, the next layer, and it will meet you exactly where you are. We'll see you in the next depth. Depthoria continues.